Good afternoon, and thank you for making the time out of your busy schedule to attend this webinar, the University of Alberta Strategic Plan for EDI and Your Teaching Practice, webinar number 7, Human Rights. Our webinar today is facilitated by Dr. Evelyn Hamdon and I. Dr. Hamdon, please introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me, Everett. I'm sorry I'm not able to see everyone, but I am happy to be part of this conversation. As Everett has said, my name is Evelyn Hamdon. My pronouns are she and her, and I identify as a Muslim settler of Lebanese ancestry. Currently, I'm working as Senior Advisor for Equity and Human Rights in the Office of the Provost.
I am Everett Igobo, and my pronouns are he, him, and his. My role at CTL is Lead Educational Developer, Critical Pedagogies, and EDI. The webinar will be about 15 minutes, followed by a Q&A session. Please submit your questions via the link in the chat, and you can additionally post your questions in the chat or ask them in person after the presentation. The University of Alberta respectfully acknowledges that we are located on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional gathering place for diverse Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota Sioux, Iroquois, Dene, Ojibwe, Anishinaabe, Inuit, and many others whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to influence our vibrant community. I will read out the access check adapted from the University of Toronto and borrowed from my colleague Mandy Penny, Lead Educational Developer, Digital Pedagogies and Access. For transparency, we understand access to be a shared responsibility between everyone in this space. Our goal is to strive for an inclusive and accessible space that reduces the need for anyone to unwillingly disclose a disability or impairment for the purposes of gaining an accommodation. We want to be mindful about distinguishing between formal accommodations, itself sometimes a difficult process to navigate, and access needs, which we all bring to our spaces from a variety of social locations. In doing this work together, we strive to welcome disability and the changes it brings into our space. If you have an access need that we have not addressed, or you notice a barrier that doesn't directly impact your engagement, but may impact that of others, please feel free to bring it to our attention via whatever channel you prefer. This is webinar number 7 in a series of 8. Webinar number 1 was equity, number 2, diversity, number 3, inclusivity, number 4, reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, number 5, accessibility, and number 6, substantive equality. And the videos for these webinars are on our CTL YouTube channel. Please review them as these 6 EDI concepts are closely related. Our final EDI principle in this series is intersectionality. During this webinar, I will outline the 8 principles of the EDI strategic plan. Additionally, Dr. Ev Hamdon and I will discuss human rights as it impacts learning and teaching. Our EDI strategic plan is guided by 8 principles. Diversity, equity, inclusion, human rights, reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, accessibility, intersectionality, and equality substantive. At CTL in 2022, we developed teaching and learning associations for each of these 8 EDI principles as follows. Human rights are fundamental rights in the classroom to be and belong as who we each are as whole people. Equity is fair and just conditions in teaching and learning to allow students to realize their full potential. Diversity refers to multiple identities of students in our classrooms. Inclusion is valuing and nurturing the ideas, thoughts, perspective, backgrounds, and identities of students. Equality substantive is consciously addressing the range of conditions that deny equity to individual student and student demographics in the classroom, conditions that create opportunities for identified disadvantaged students in the classroom. Intersectionality is the way that individual axes of oppression compound and interweave in who each person is in the classroom, and how these axes never exist separate from each other, but always interlocked. Accessibility is physical, pedagogical, and administrative structures designed and redesigned to foster, facilitate, and empower student success. Reconciliation with Indigenous peoples means beginning in truth and moving toward the building and sustaining of respectful, responsible, and ethical relationships with Indigenous peoples and all those living across the nation we now call Canada. Our University of Alberta's EDI strategic plan defines human rights as follows. Every person, by virtue of being human, is entitled to certain fundamental rights, regardless of race, color, ancestry, place of origin, religious beliefs, gender, gender identity, and gender expression, physical disability, mental disability, marital status, family status, sexual orientation, age, political beliefs, and any other protected grounds as amended over time. Each person is entitled to a life of dignity, equality, and respect, free from discrimination, harassment, and bullying. The university's commitment to human rights is reflected in its policies and practices, as well as the supports it makes available to the members of its community. The United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, in 1948 enacted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and some of the important outcomes include education as a fundamental human right, the Right to Education Initiative, and there's an NGO, the International Organization for the Right of Education and Freedom of Education, UNESCO Convention Against Discrimination in Education, and finally, Education 2030 Agenda. That said, and very timely, I now welcome Dr. Evelyn Hampton to discuss human rights, drawing on its relationship with learning and teaching in a good way. Welcome, Evelyn. So we are going, question number one, what do we mean by protected grounds?
Such a good question, and one I'm delighted to try and answer. Well, as human rights law and policy remind us, there are groups of people who have historically been marginalized and disadvantaged simply because of some aspect of their identity. And these are the grounds that are protected under human rights legislation and in our own university policy. I'm not going to repeat them. Everett, thank you for articulating what they all are, and you can see them up here on this slide. So these protected grounds are what give substance and life to our discrimination, harassment, duty to accommodate policy, and also that help to guide us in creating inclusive spaces. I want to draw your attention to one difference between legislation, the Human Rights Act in Alberta, and our own policy, and that is the addition here at the U of A, under our policy, the addition of political belief as a protected ground. This is tied to academic freedom, definitely a conversation for another day. So protected grounds and human rights give us a framework to support our activities in addressing discrimination or providing accommodation. So all of our work around discrimination and accommodation is predicated on these grounds.
Thanks so much, Evelyn. Question number two, Can you please highlight aspects of the discrimination, harassment, and duty to accommodate, that is DHDA policy and procedures as it relates to human rights and protected grounds?
I can, and I would like to take the liberty of beginning just by zooming out a little bit before I zoom in on that specific policy and talk about sort of the network of legislation, of policies, of strategic plans, and of charters that also shape and guide our work relating to accommodation, preventing discrimination, etc. And so that was in that slide. I think it might be back. That's it. Awesome. Thank you, Everett. So aside from the Human Rights Act, which we've already talked about, and the importance of this through the giving to us of the protected grounds or the identifying of protected grounds, we also have the Occupational Health and Safety Act, which under its most recent revision expanded the notion of safety to include psychological and social safety, which very much is related to issues of preventing and addressing discrimination and ensuring timely and appropriate accommodation. We also have at least 2 strategic plans that are helpful to us in our work. So that would be, of course, the Strategic Plan for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. And now we have Braiding Past, Present, and Future, the University of Alberta's Indigenous Strategic Plan. We're also signatories to 2 charters that are related to this work that enshrine and embed good human rights and equity practices, Dimensions Canada and the Scarborough Charter. And then we have a whole series of policies and procedures. I have to say they're not all articulated in that slide, but I do invite people, whether you're a policy aficionado or not, to check out that network of policies. But zooming in on the key elements of the policy and how all of that is connected up to human rights and to protected grounds. Well, I'd like to focus on 3 elements of the policy: the principles that undergird the policy, the definitions that are provided for us in the policy, and the description of accommodation and the articulation of protected grounds as it relates to accommodation. So the policy is predicated on 3 principles: responsibility, academic freedom, and equity. I know you've already had conversations about equity. I've alluded to academic freedom. Both of those are beyond the scope of this conversation. But I do want to focus on responsibility, because what the policy reminds us is that each member of the university, not just sort of the institution at large, but each member of the university is responsible to know the policy, to know our obligations under the policy, and to comport ourselves accordingly. But additionally, if you are in a leadership position, which I would consider any professor or instructor to be in a leadership position, we are also responsible for the policy to ensure that in the space we have responsibility for, that everyone is aware of our obligations under the policy. I also want to, for those of you who haven't looked deeply at the policy, just to alert you to the fact that there's really good definitional material in the policy that lets us know what the policy means by discrimination, what it means by harassment and bullying, and how these things are intertwined with our obligations under human rights ideas, ideals, and of course the legislation. And then it describes what it means for us to accommodate and the basis upon which a person can request an accommodation. And that comes back to human rights and the protected grounds. So we're always asking for or receiving accommodation based on one or more of those grounds. So we are constrained in that way, but also, as Everett pointed out in his preamble, the grounds are always evolving and changing to reflect the more we learn about the work we need to do to engender a flourishing of all human rights. So that's sort of the policy in a nutshell.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ev, for succinctly summarizing that: discrimination, harassment, bullying, and then with the triangle of responsibility, academic freedom, and equity. Moving along to question number 3. What do the protected grounds have to do with teaching and learning?
Yeah, well, everything. Everything, because understanding that we are obligated to provide access to the full range of human diversity at our university is sort of at the heart of all of this work. And I'd like to use this image that I'm sure many of you have seen elsewhere. I'd like to use this image to help us explore, what the protected grounds have to do with inclusive teaching and learning. And I'll start by drawing your attention to the image on the left-hand side of this panel of images, and to this simplistic representation of human diversity, and the fence as a representation of the classroom, let's say, of all of the elements of the classroom. So this is the stuff of which the classroom might be made, and that might include curricula, pedagogies, our personal and collective biases in that learning space, and physical barriers, and so many other things. And without attention to our commitments under our policy and under human rights legislation, we might just say, well, we've prepared the scene, we prepared the classroom, here's what we have on offer. If you can't access it because of some aspect of your identity, well, that's too bad. We've provided the same thing to every person, so be it. But under human rights legislation, under the ideals of human rights, within the construct of our policy, and of course within the heart and the ethos of equity, diversity, and inclusion, we move to that middle panel, and we say that really in a contemporary world where we want to ensure that the full range of human diversity and difference, the full range of humanity can have access to the field, as it were, then we might have to tweak or amend or change the content of what we teach, the way we teach. We might have to investigate our own biases or the physical surroundings to ensure that people have what they need to have access and to flourish once they get to the university. That's the process and the practice of accommodation. And again, we provide those accommodations based on one or more of the protected grounds. And they are, as the text underneath those images describes, accommodation is intended to reduce or eliminate the impact of rules, practices, standards, processes, etc., that may be discriminatory, not because we're terrible people and we want to exclude folks, but I say this happens because the university was created at a time when the full range of human diversity wasn't really considered. I mean, women were barely, if ever, considered as potential candidates to come to a university. And we see the relics of this way of thinking in an absence of accessible and all gender washrooms, in the absence of easily and readily accessible buildings, in the persistence, for example, of ableist, sanist, racist language that we find in various texts, or even in our everyday speech patterns. So what we're doing is we're using human rights thinking, and we're using the policy to scan our classrooms for signs where these lingering effects of older thinking may persist, so that we can either accommodate if a student alerts us to a need for accommodation, or by preemptively, as we move towards, on the right-hand side, universal design and universal design for learning, constructing our university spaces, imagining a rich, wide range of human beings that we hope to come and flourish here. So I hope I've answered that question a little bit, Everett. I do have these three very, very sort of general kinds of approaches to thinking inclusively and thinking with these frameworks in mind. The one is for all of us to try not to let our own experience obscure how different another's experience might be. So just because the presence or absence of a curb cut might not affect me because of my body, I shouldn't diminish or ignore the effect that an absence of a curb cut might have on another human being's ability to be successful at the U of A. I think we need to learn to be intentional in thinking about how various humans experience the built world and the symbolic world. Little harder to imagine how we encounter the symbolic world. Our worlds are rich with symbols that affect us all differently, but we do need to attune ourselves to that. I mean, that's the world of curriculum, right? And to keep the principles and the practices and the aspirations of the discrimination, harassment, and duty to accommodate policy in mind, along with those important human rights considerations.
Thanks so much, Ev. And the last question, how can we as educators be guided by the DHDA policy and procedures to foster human rights and inclusivity in our classroom or teaching spaces?
Well, I hope people won't take my answer the wrong way. And I'm not meaning this facetiously, but really, please read the policy. There's so much good information in it, and the heart that went into crafting this policy and the ideals that are embedded in it really do help us understand what these commitments are, and especially as it relates to accommodation, so that we are prepared as people who are teaching, prepared to interact with our students in a way that helps them receive the mitigations they require to be successful in our classrooms. And this, I mean, I know we're talking about inclusive classrooms here, but also remembering that faculty and staff are also entitled to be accommodated in their workspaces as well. So we want to make these principles and practices come to life. So read the policy and reach out to folks like Everett and myself if you have any questions at all. This isn't easy work, and we want you to be successful. I want to support folks who are striving to do this.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ev Hamdon, for collaborating with me to deliver this human rights webinar. And I'm looking forward to our future collaborations to include webinars and workshops surrounding human rights and EDI issues in the classroom. Here are our references for the webinar, and you may turn on your cameras for the Q&A session. So I'll just show you our references. That is the first one and the second one, and I think we are done.